I am going to run in the federal election as an independent candidate.
I will be running as an independent candidate.
I have to give a shout out to my amazing colleague, Elizabeth May.
I see my friend and colleague, Elizabeth May, and the Green Party of Canada as natural and necessary allies.
We need independent voices who will work with independent partisans.
What some of us like to call independent partisans.
That independents will work with everyone.
It means you are committed to working with everyone.
Two independent candidates with sort of the same message. Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott will be running in the next federal election, but stepping away from party politics. So how effective can anyone really be as independents? And could it somehow spark a larger movement? Time for At Issue. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne in Toronto tonight, and Aaron Weary joins me here in Ottawa. Good to see everybody. Welcome, Aaron. Okay, so when my capable and formidable producer, Ariel, re-listened to those speeches and saw how similar the announcements were, it seemed only fair to sort of pull out those parts to show people that they were messaging largely the same thing when they made that decision earlier this week. I'll start with you, Chantal. How do you think that message from those particular candidates or MPs will resonate with Canadians?
I'm not convinced they're going to resonate with Canadians. They may resonate in their respective ridings because of who they are and not because of the independence. But I don't see a lot of voters saying, gee, I wish my MP left this party and came to me and said, I'm going to be independent. I think most Canadians, and the polls do show that, when they vote, sure are looking at who the candidate is. And in some cases, it matters more than others. But at the end of the day, they are looking at the party policies and the party that they're voting for.
It seemed that one line, Andrew, that they both repeated, independent partisans, that some are calling, it was only those two that are using that language, independent partisans. I had never heard that before this week. And it seems to me in some way contradictory. But tell me how you read it and the decision they made.
Well, I agree with Chantal. Their chances are not great. I also agree that parties serve a useful purpose in Canadian politics and democratic politics of kind of branding. They give you a rough and ready guide as to what does this person tend to believe in. Where I have some sympathy for this is I guess that oxymoron of independent partisan. We've adopted a system in Canada of party politics way past the level of party discipline that is required. Much more uniformity is demanded of MPs than is really legitimate to demand of them. All has been subsumed in the cult of the leader. So there is room, even within a party system, for a little more independent judgment for candidates and MPs to deviate from the party line more than they've been allowed to in Canada. And if this helps to loosen that up, it'll be all to the good. But their chances of getting elected traditionally would be considered not terribly good. There might be a bit more chance for these two because they're so well known, and because of the possibility that we might be into a minority government after this election, in which case every MP has a bit more bargaining room than they might otherwise.
What do you think, Aaron, of what I guess is motivating them and what they had to say?
Well, I think what's motivating them really is the fact that they don't really have a party anymore. I mean, it's pretty easy or pretty tempting, I imagine, to make an argument for independence when you really don't have a political party, or the political party that you previously belonged to has decided to kick you out. There's a bit of irony here insofar as the only reason they have a chance as independents is because they came up through the party system. I would tend to agree, though, with Andrew that there's a chance here for a bit of a loosening up, that they may stand for something. They may not get elected, but the idea of there being a bit more of an independent streak within politics, that they may come to represent that, particularly if they get elected. Though I would also add that if you're really going to have this discussion, rather than focusing on just Jane Philpott and Jody Wilson-Raybould, I think you could look at somebody like Nathaniel Erskine-Smith in the Liberal backbench, who has been speaking his mind and voting independently and has managed to remain in caucus. And seemingly remain a caucus member in good standing with the Liberals. That's, I think, if you're looking into a discussion about independence in Parliament, there's a pretty good example.
But MPs who do, I mean, they're not typically kicked out of caucus the way that Philpott and Wilson-Raybould were, but they're typically punished in other ways. They have committee assignments taken away from them, they don't get to travel, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways in which the discipline is enforced. It's a pity in a way that they didn't do as they were hinting they might, or as it was suggested they might, and that's join the Green Caucus, because the Green Caucus does operate on that basis. They have much more. I mean, the Green Caucus, the Green Party operates much more on that basis.
Two of them now, so there is a caucus.
Right.
Yeah.
But they have much more of an ethos of MPs should be allowed to vote to deviate from the party line within the Greens.
Yeah. Chantal, you went in there, yeah.
Yes, but well, to the issue that it's too bad they didn't join the Green Party, I would have liked that, because I would have liked that them to explain why on principle and in the name of independence they did not then feel so strongly about buying a pipeline that they felt comfortable staying in cabinet. So at some point, what you can live with when you're a Liberal in all of your independence of spirit does come back to haunt you, and that goes to Aaron's point. But I think what you would really want to get away from the punishment issue, and Andrew is quite right on that MPs do get punished, set aside, don't get prize appointments, is for more MPs who are part of parties to be more independent. Because if a critical mass of them exercise their independence, then the punishment system would fall apart. And the fact is that they don't.
Except then, first of all, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, he's on a committee. I mean, I don't know if he's been punished in other ways for talking, but he does have some positions of credibility there. But if everyone is more independent, and this is where I came under criticism for things this week that I said on podcasts and whatnot, if everyone is more independent, then what is the point of the party? I mean, everyone can't just be out there doing whatever they want, because that's not how the system ultimately functions. And when we listened to both of those MPs this week, I did get the impression myself that because they had never been MPs, they had only ever been in cabinet, that perhaps they were a bit naive about what actually happens for MPs and how much freedom they actually have. I don't know if anyone else felt that way, but that's the thing I thought of. Go ahead, Chantal.
To build on your point, I would argue that because they'd never been MPs and had never sat in opposition, they may also have been a bit naive about what it means to not be in cabinet on your first day in the House of Commons and to be sitting at the back of the House of Commons.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between what is and what should be. So maybe they're naive about what is.
Yes.
But I don't think it's naive to say that MPs within a party system could still have more opportunity to exercise their mental faculties, to represent their constituents, to represent their own consciences, to use their own judgment of things. It's fine to run under our party platform, and you should keep the promises you make. I don't see anything inconsistent with an MP or a candidate, I should say, saying, okay, here's our party platform. You should know, electors of this riding, that I differ with the party on this, this, and this, and I won't necessarily pledge to vote on those things. I don't see anything wrong with saying there's a broad philosophical view that I share with the party, but on certain issues I deviate from the party line, and if you can win the nomination on that basis, fine. Yeah. Chantal's right that MPs have it within their power to rise up and rebel, but if they were of a mind to do so, they probably wouldn't have joined the system to begin with. There's a self-selection of the kind of person who's willing to run for parties as they are currently constituted. And there's also a process of nomination and selection that you have to show yourself to be a quote-unquote team player to have any chance of getting into Parliament.
Aaron, what do you think? How would that work then if we had more of this that everyone seems to think would be of some benefit?
Yeah, I think you're looking for sort of a midway point between an all-powerful party leader who tells their MPs what to do and a parliament of 338 independents. Andrew, this will be catnip for Andrew, but the British Parliament is a bit more further along in this regard. They also have more MPs, so it's a bit easier to rebel and not necessarily be a pivotal vote, not necessarily come under the punishment from the whip. Again, though, I think there have been developments in this Parliament that shouldn't necessarily be just sort of dismissed or quickly overlooked. Both Ms. Philpott and Ms. Wilson-Raybould would be familiar with the vote on the genetic discrimination bill, and that's where the federal cabinet took a position. It's been reported that Jody Wilson-Raybould addressed caucus and said, we don't like this bill, you should vote against it, and more than 100 Liberal backbenchers stood up and voted for it and passed the bill into law. And there's been a few instances of that where Liberal backbenchers have voted in sufficient numbers to overrule a government vote. And so there have been little developments like that I think show you sort of where things could go. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're nearly at the point where you would say that there's really an acceptable level of independence or that there's a lot of free-spiritedness in Parliament. But there have been little signs of this that suggest that there is a path there, that you could do things and the sky wouldn't fall.
And we in the media have to bear a share of responsibility for this, that we are all too inclined to treat anybody who deviates from the party line as being a sign of division, disunity, as some sort of crisis. We ought to treat it more as these are MPs doing their job, using their brains, and that's something to be certainly not castigated and maybe celebrated.
But if more MPs were doing it more regularly, it wouldn't be covered in the same way, especially if they could explain why they are deviating from the party line beyond making a name for themselves. That always helps. But I agree with Aaron, even in this Parliament, the current Minister of Justice did not really support the bill that the government put forward on medically assisted death. And he is now the Minister of Justice. So. And at the time, there were a number of thoughtful MPs in every party that disagreed with what was basically the party line, and they were free to vote their conscience, and were told there would be no consequences, and there were not. But to the notion that a minority parliament enables individual MPs, that is true, but only up to a point.
Yes.
Within government benches, it tends to do the opposite, because the fate of the government is in the balance at every vote. It restricts freedom even more than what you've seen in a majority parliament.
Okay, got to leave it there. Thank you, everybody. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week, we're going to talk about the U.S. Vice President's very quick trip to Ottawa. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.